Well, can we go there? Can we go women in the church?
Yeah. Where do you
Um,
stand on this?
oh, what? I was gonna go there and then you flipped it on me. Scary.
Eh, eh.
Um, wait, do you have a specific question? Women should come to the church. That's what I think.
Should come to church. Yeah, I think
No, no, no.
women, please come to church. No,
Be
I
there with
think my
us.
question is more of like women in leadership
Huh.
and um where you come from that because I have a particular background in it and I'm not sure what I think fully
Hmm.
anymore.
Yeah. Oh boy.
But I'm curious, as a man that is married to a woman and has a daughter, fresh out the oven,
Yeah.
well, sort of.
Hmm. Um. Yeah. So I think first off, I think there's a lot of like what you've already been saying of the water is wet and not realizing the maybe the highway that I was on as a man
Yeah.
and the potential that I could have had in within ministry and um yeah, so I do think there's been for sure like a ton of barriers.
Mm.
Outright barriers, you are not allowed here or to be in this role. And then probably still now like yeah, unconscious like like should
Yeah.
you be? But then the Bible doesn't necessarily make this super easy.
Yeah.
Um yeah, so I I guess I remember my pastor back in Oregon saying
Mm.
something along the lines of I believe a woman can do anything in the church that a man can do, except for head pastoring that church.
Hmm.
So I think that's where he drew the line. So that's things like, I don't know, serving in some sort of way, getting up in front of people, even potentially like preaching,
Hmm.
but just like the one who's responsible for that church.
Yeah.
I guess he said that um, shouldn't be a woman.
Yeah.
I don't know, and that just feels dirty coming out of my mouth. I'm just like,
Mm.
blech.
Yeah.
But as I look in the Bible, I see a gendered world
Hmm.
right from the beginning. God made a male and female. He made us have different experiences. So this isn't necessarily like this. So what we do with the navigators with like Bible study, we go like observation, then interpretation. You go
Yep.
too quickly to interpretation, and you're like missing a whole lot of things. So just simple observations, like okay, he's got this section where he's like, okay, male and female is how I've made him. Um, and then as I observe the world, he's given us different experiences
Mm.
and I don't really know what to do with these things, but like
Mm.
even pregnancy, like it's just so vastly different. Like, why
Mm.
can't we like share the baby? You take half, I'll take half. Um,
You take the first 3 months and then I'll take the rest.
yeah.
You have the morning sickness and I'll take the rest. Yeah.
Well, yeah, with what Brianna went through with actually giving birth, I was
Oh
like,
no.
geez, I will take the first half. I'll take the first half.
Oh.
Um, but yeah, like, why couldn't we like then osmosis the baby into your tummy? Why 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 can I not breastfeed?
Yeah.
God, the
Yeah.
heck? Why does Brianna have to go through that feeling of you're the provider of the
Mm.
food and baby's not eating well and you're
Yeah.
getting frustrated, but you're like the one that needs to figure it out. Like I just can encourage on the side and um why did God why did God make me have an easier ability to pack
Mm.
on muscle like just my genetic makeup on average there's plenty of women that are much stronger than me but me to Brianna like
Yeah.
I'm just more powerful. I have more ability
Mm.
for good and for harm but so it's like why did you do
Yeah.
this, God? And so I don't know if I have a bunch of answers, but I think there is a path there then
Mm.
of gendered world and difference of experiences, difference of genetic makeup and strengths and weaknesses could create um, roles for our flourishing. I think that's
Mm.
how I could get there.
Yeah.
Um, but then I have a whole bunch of 21st century sensibility. And to be honest, men of my age and everyone younger has been seeped in this narrative of men have done a lot of bad, men have done a lot of evil. Um, so it's been hard to know what is the redeeming aspect of being a man.
Yeah.
I've mostly just heard like white and male are just like bywords. Those are like the yucky things. Oh, and then a white male showed up and you're like, well, now this story's ruined. Now no one wants to hear this.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so trying to figure out, okay, well, so then what's the beauty then? Is there beauty in how God created things? And so then we get to the place of what then does that mean for marriages and relationships between men and women and friendships, and then we move into organizations and groups and I don't know, it's totally such a cop-out answer, but like
I don't think it's a cop-out answer to say that you don't know. Like, I think it's only a cop-out if you're like, I don't know and I don't really care and I'm not going to look into it. Then I would be like, yeah, that's not great. But if you're like, I don't know and I'm still learning about it, then I'm like, cool, that's awesome. Like, because there's a lot of things with this that I'm also learning too. Because I mean, I think it's hard as a white man, maybe, at least what I'm hearing, to figure out like, okay, you know that white men have done a lot of damage in history, but then as you are one, what do you do with that?
Yeah, how do I operate in that without getting somewhat crippled by that shame of like, I have so much to atone for. I have this stupid cowlick that makes my hair like this when I get up in the morning. I have to atone for that. I was going
to talk to you about your cowlick, and I'm really glad that you talked that.
No, why is my hair like that? It's nice, but then it's like, wow, gosh, but other people don't have that. Anyway, the silly example, but like, yeah. So it's that question of like, how do we atone for the sins of the past and live in confidence in the present? I don't really know.
Yeah. Oh, it's tricky. No, it's good to hear your perspective on it, because I think it carries a different flavor of like, well, I didn't do it. Like I didn't carry all these things, but also to know that you're like, well, I know that I've had benefit from it. And it's like a dangerous, and for a lot of people, there's trauma with it, of like a white man saying you can't do XYZ, and being conscious of it, as opposed to, I have all the answers, which is the problem, right? Of saying like, oh, I have all the answers. I know exactly how God's kingdom is supposed to be set up because I am XYZ. There would be a problem if it was only women as well. I mean, a lot of people are afraid of the word feminist, but if we break down that word, that like, it's a lot of words are quite triggering, right? Like complementarianism or roles, or it's like our generation doesn't like the word moist, but also people don't like the word gender roles or submission. Like I find myself getting like bristly when I hear the word submission, because it was used in such a horrible way as like a weaponizing word, as opposed to the beautiful thing that it can be, which is a woman being submitted to a man who is submitted to Christ. Like I trust a man so much more if I see that he is submitted to Christ and he loves his wife and he's willing to lay down his life. People just say half of the verse. And there's a big culture as well, even for like women too, of we're able to do anything we want to. We have all the power. We're as strong as men. We can do anything that a man can do. And then what feels like controlling when someone says, yes, but there's a role for women in the church and there's a role for men. And especially when it gets narrowed down to only in marriage, of when people say, oh, like the role of the woman is to submit to the man. And you're like, yeah, but now you're not talking about the people in the church who don't fall under that category, like for children with their parents, or for women who are widowed or divorced, or someone that is has homosexual like attraction. And it doesn't talk about all of the people and the instances that we have in the kingdom of God that are in the church. And it's a good example, and marriage is a beautiful, beautiful thing. I love it. One day I hope to be in it. You know, it's just that it's when it's reduced down to, it is X, Y, and Z, and it's simple, and that's what God's word says. Yes, that's what God's word says, but there's also a little bit more to it. Like, what is it that we all give up to live a more Christ-like life?
Hmm.
And all of
Hmm.
us give something up. Like Casey was talking about in the last podcast about
Hmm.
like being polyamorous. It's a sacrifice to only
Hmm.
have one partner,
Hmm.
especially like in Western culture or even in Amsterdam. Like just have as many partners as you want to. Don't be committed. It's very countercultural to say this is the role of the church or the people in the church of like when you're in a relationship, you're in a relationship with one woman and you don't all these things like, or to be in a relationship and a man and a woman. So I think being conscious of people's triggers or the ways that it's been harmful to what God is saying, which is love God, love other people. And then also still going with truth, but understanding that the truth has been used as a weaponizing feature for a while too.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So like wives, be submissive to your husbands. That's a triggering word for a lot of people because that sometimes maybe that person walked through an abusive marriage or saw their mother get abused or whatever, or was abused by their father. And that was the justification for it, is you need to be submissive to me. So it takes a lot of time for that person to get back to a point where they're like, actually, I can trust men again, because I've heard this only used as a way to not edify and glorify, the way to put me into a corner. So I think that sometimes with the conversation of egalitarianism and complementarianism, and when people say, oh, I'm a feminist or I am egalitarian or complementarian, they're immediately things that people think, and it's based off of your experience and how the truth or the words have been used against you. So that's why I'm very conscious when I have a conversation with someone. I don't go, I'm complementarian or I'm egalitarian or I'm a feminist, because I know everyone's had a completely different experience of those words. And the people who have borne that flag, and just the same way as you've had experience when people say, well, you're a white privileged man, and like basically make it seem like there's nothing you can do to fix this. There's nothing you can do to walk into it, as opposed to you are this, and also we're called to this. Like we all have our sin tendencies and things that we need to walk into and learn and grow from. So yeah, that's in a nutshell
No,
a little bit of
good.
how I approach it, because
No,
I'm
really
also still exploring like what is the role of women in church.
Yeah, I want to pause and just give a couple definitions to complementarianism and egalitarianism for people who aren't in the Christian narrative. Because I was just thinking, also not sold out on this lingo, but I want people to look at our marriage and think we're egalitarianism, because I'm working in my role so well that I really am like I am laying down my life for Brianna and propelling her, listening to her voice, like that she has, like that we run this together. But at the end of the day, the responsibility for how this is going, I know, is on my shoulders, but that doesn't mean I get to lord it. I just know that like I'm the one responsible. So as people look in, I want them to see like this is an equal partnership in how they're parenting. But then my own sin is in there too, my own wounds of I think in America that people talk about like a guilt innocence society, but I know a shame version of the gospel. Like the gospel spoke to my shame. And so in so many different ways, but I'm the middle child of 5 boys, and so it's really easy to let my voice go down in order to keep the peace and propel other voices. Brianna was an only child. She had to fight. She was raised by her dad. Her mom wasn't in the picture, so she had to fight for her voice to be heard. So you can kind of already see how a power dynamic could be occurring in a relationship where Brianna's natural inclination is to keep going in order for her side to be heard. And my natural inclination is to shut down in the face of opposition in order to keep harmony. And so God knows that about me. And so what he's working on is for me to, exactly what you were already saying, to not, so I bottle and then I explode. And so he's teaching me how to respond, not react. And my
Yeah.
reactions is either freezing or trying to run away
Yeah.
or shutting down. And he's teaching me, and I think this is like godly manhood, but to actually be able to articulate my feelings or my hurt or my vulnerabilities or how I see things in a way that's gracious but is firm and doesn't self-deprecate in the process, and
Yeah.
and to still hear Brianna. So yeah, it's just even interesting in our own marriage. I could easily and often do abdicate because I don't care, or because I don't have an opinion, or because I'm scared, or because Brianna's far better at this decision process than me,
Yeah.
or because it takes way too much energy. Things like us praying together. I know that Brianna really values it when I lead out in that and say, hey,
Yeah.
like let's make praying before we go to bed a thing that we do. Yeah. So it's so messy, but like I know that role is not for my lording ability. It's for God to
Yeah.
call something out of me that has been twisted, and to keep pushing me away from passivity and into servant leadership. And yeah, so I think I can articulate a little bit easier from the man's side of things. But even like with women, I might go on a bad branch here, but like women are just good at taking initiative. Like you look at like who's serving in the church, or who's like in group projects, like who's taking because their handwriting's good or something. Like it's just women are because that I like so many skill sets, and maybe like early on in age, it's just like man's probably gonna like mess this up. I might as well just be the one that like jumps in. Hadeel, you're still with me? So Hadeel, a little bit of a blip there with the audio, but yeah, we're obviously jumping in knee deep to some of the controversies that can exist within Christianity, and it's a hard conversation. It's fascinating and it's a good one. So yeah, for you non-believing, non-Christian people who have no idea what we're talking about, audience, definitely look it up. It's interesting. And I had mentioned this already, but the Bible, which is our standard for what we look for truth, it kind of leaves room for two different types of interpretation. Complementarianism talks about gender roles, a little bit of what I was describing. And the implications of it are men can only be men for certain leadership positions. And it has implications for marriages as well. And then egalitarian is more that they're equal, and both would say that they're equal, but egalitarians would say that there is no difference between abilities and even within the church positions that they can hold. So that'd be more like, it's okay for a woman to be a pastor, lead pastor.
Like if you have the ability to speak and teach, then you can lead.
Yeah. Which even on that, Hadeel, so even within the Navigators, I've been in some, different ministries, but one of the things I appreciate out here in Curtis, and, he has no qualm with anyone teaching. And I kind of see that too. Like the Navigators, we're like a bunch of peers. We're a bunch of students or people in our 20s, young professionals or whatever. So when we're teaching, it's not necessarily from like a pastoral standpoint, but more of like a taking apart the scripture together. And so in that realm, I really have no problem. But then, and this is the thing that I'm totally still trying to figure out, like, what does it mean to be a pastor or in that leadership role? But I think I'm totally fine with, like a woman teaching. And I actually am eager to hear their perspective. It's kind of like what we had previously talked about, like someone who has a different lens on the world. I want to hear their perspective. I want to hear their insights, especially if they're passionate about teaching and about God's word. And like, I want to hear from that person. So for me, it's like, I don't get too caught up in like roles, because I'm just eager to hear from the person who's the best to deliver whatever it is. you don't want me cooking because you're not going to get the best meal. Brianna's an amazing cook. She should be the one cooking. So in that sense, I do kind of go more towards like, well, where are our natural strengths and can we live into those?
Yeah.
But then it's that realm of responsibility that I'm also trying to figure out fully of like, so how does that work? For whatever reason, the language seems to suggest that Brianna is responsible for how she responds to me, whether I'm a good husband or not. And I'm responsible to God for how I am as a husband. And for me, as the man, as I read that, and you had already mentioned Ephesians 5, which is kind of the main thesis of all of this. But yeah, I see a majority of that passage directed towards men and how we're to be as husbands. And it's like a high calling. It calls me to lay down my life and love her as I love my own body, which sometimes feels weird because I'm like, what does that mean? But
it's not looking for a weak-willed man. It's a man with a backbone.
Yeah. And when Brianna and I are at our finest, it's when we both feel the freedom to fully voice what we have to say, yet we're mutually submitting to each other, which is also ultimately the starting point of Ephesians 5. Like it talks about submit to one another on a whole. So yeah, I just feel like we need to kind of keep propelling the fact that Christianity is all about submission. And these are different ways that it happens. So I'm submitting in the way that I'm a servant leader to Brianna. And if I do that well enough, her following my lead should not be a cumbersome thing.
Right. Now you can make each other's job a little bit easier. And that's the same as well in like submitting to authority, like submitting to the authority of the church or submitting to authority in like even lockdown regulations that are happening in the Netherlands. Like there's a lot of submitting language that's like they're not absolved the responsibility of hearing my voice even while I submit. So let's say the government or whoever makes a decision that impacts the rest of let's say it's church leadership. We'll make that a little bit simpler. Church leadership, simple. So let's say it's church leadership and they make a decision that negatively impacts part of the congregation and marginalizes them and does not edify them in a way. And then that's not called out and they don't take authorship or like ownership of the impact of their decisions. It's easier to be submitted to somebody who you know is trying to walk in the way that is honoring to you. But it's when it's somebody does something that is against you or is not in like encouraging or edifying of you that it's hard to submit because then it feels like it's stupid. Like why am I submitting to this person or this authority that doesn't have my best in mind? And a lot of that is giving it to God, but not also like it's not just, well, they meant the best and just move on with my life. You still call and say, hey, that wasn't helpful. And it's now between them and God for how they respond to being called. And still trusting that God is doing the work in them and in the church to edify and to sanctify and to grow, and that there will be sin as well. But I trust that the God that is speeding into the church and the church authority is also going to remain consistent with them and consistent with me. And submitting in that, it's such a weird dynamic because it's so not something that, let's say, traditional like worldview right now, Western view is like, if the authorities don't do what's good for you, then you need to live your own life. And it's so countercultural and it feels very archaic. Like if I say that as saying I'm submitting to the authority of so-and-so, whatever, there's a lot of women that are also like, wow, you're drinking the misogynist Kool-Aid. But if I'm submitting to the God who made us all and trying to work that out through him and not just saying I'm submitting to a man because he's a man for the sake of that, it has a different flavor. I trust God a lot more than I trust my fellow man, but I also know that God has a redeeming work he's doing in men too. I need them just as much as I need the women in my life, but I also need to also repent and to have open conversations. I think that's something that I grow into a lot is I can tend to be more like you, where you were saying like, okay, there's like that flight, like let's let harmonization be the thing. Like, let's
Mm.
not call things out. And I have tended to want to run away from situations that are harmful or hurtful to me, instead of giving the chance of like, hey, that thing you did or this thing was wrong and we need to reconcile this. So like moving into reconciliation, that is hard work, because it means sitting there and potentially being hurt again. Not into like continuing to stay in abuse, but you know, giving the opportunity of like, we can reconcile this relationship, because I think that's also spiritual warfare that happens too. Of there's brokenness in our relationship with God, but there's also brokenness between men and women. And when we start to say women or men are better, that feeds into this rift that, frankly, Satan wants to make that stronger, to make that rift even bigger. And it's very countercultural to say, I need you and you need me,
Well,
and not go into one way or the other.
And one of the most loving things that you could do, you know, this is for both you and I as potential avoiders, but is to say that, is to say, hey, this is not right. How this went down, or the message that happened, or the fact that there's not much representation in leadership or in the decision from this point of view. That's actually the loving thing. Yeah. So it's like those in leadership and those who are within the group or whatever, like the leadership needs to have that humble heart to say, we might be getting things wrong, and to actively seek out, how is this impacting all the different people within our congregation, men, women, minorities, majority, whoever it might be. But as a leader, and I really feel this, like, it's so easy to just be crippled by all the ways that I can mess up. And so I really need to know that my congregation, which I don't really have that, but I just use it for the sake of, because I am in leadership and I'm leading a little gaggle of students, and I need to know that I need to trust that they will say something to help me see my blind spots. So that, it's such a hard balance. And that's why, you know, ultimately I started off like, I'm a Christian who's trying to figure out my blind spots, because I know they're there. And the shame of my childhood is like, you will never know your blind spots. There's parts about you, Scott, that will never be fixed. And that's so crippling. But then to step into, just the trust in the body of other believers that they will lovingly let me know. And so I don't need to apologize for everything. Let somebody come to me and say, hey, Scott, this moment. And I'm like, thank you for your specificity.
Yeah. Specificity. I can't say that word. Yeah.
Wow.
English is my second language. Sarcasm and awkwardness is my first. That's great. No, I think that's a good way to summarize kind of like, it's a thing and we need to keep walking into it, and we won't solve it in the hour and a half or so that we have on this podcast. But I'm encouraged hearing your side as well, and like also hearing other men in my life who've redeemed a lot of like past experiences that I've had where I felt betrayed or like it's not safe. And the fact that Christ is the safe space, but it doesn't mean that safe means I don't have responsibility in this as well, to make much of Christ, and also to be honoring to the men in my life, and vice versa.
Wow, cool. Hadeel, this is awesome. I'm really encouraged, just because I feel like you're just saying right now, like I actually really gained a lot from your perspective, and I feel like I feel respected by you. Like I just feel like I'm heard and understood, and hopefully you feel the same. I feel like there's movement towards like we broached some uncomfortable topics, which is so good. But then more to do. Like I just feel like, God, we just scratched the surface. So the end of every episode, we ask our guest if you were to have one final message for the world, what would it be? Although, Hadeel, I'm curious with yours, if you had one final message for Christians, but then also like for non-Christians revolving around these things, like what would you leave us with?
Yeah, I think first I'll speak to Christians. Hello, my fellow followers of Jesus. We are a bunch of mess ups that are saved by grace alone. That's it. I think I would encourage that we make sure we stay curious and understanding other perspectives, not watering down the truth, but making sure we're consciously digesting content or listening to voices that are not like us in order to love our cities, our friends, our families in a better way. And it's going to be super uncomfortable. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. And it doesn't mean that you don't have value if you didn't know that thing. If you didn't know about racism within the church or the history or whatever, just learn about it. There's so many people who have graciously gone through and given a lot of great resources on racism, on gender roles, on the conflicts within the church. Like, let's talk about these things and lean into it and not shy away from it because it doesn't sound like it's like quote unquote deep Bible study. I think it's very helpful and loving to our world to understand those things and to say Jesus redeems these things as well, but also be able to go into the specifics. So I would say stay curious and lean into things that maybe don't sound like Christianese. Actually, maybe try to lean into some stuff. Words are failing me. Try to lean into some things that are new or uncomfortable for you that you have a knee-jerk reaction to. And you're like, oh, I don't want to talk about gender roles. Oh, why? Let's just curious. Just lean into that and have conversations with some people that are safe people, and that you can expand that as you learn more and as you go through it. But honestly, submitting a lot of that, it's reading, learning, understanding, talking with people, but a lot is submit it to Christ, ask for the Holy Spirit to speak into it, and do not shy away from the hard conversations. I think they'll do you so much good. They do me so much good. I really value my friends that lovingly call me out. I love that, but also I hate it at the same time. So it's a beautiful yet horrible thing at the same time. So yeah, that was what I ask other followers of Jesus. Like, be conscious of what you consume. Make sure you're hearing from the full color palette of God's kingdom, whether that's race or whether that is just different thoughts and opinions. And for those people who are not sold on this Jesus thing, that makes a lot of sense. The church, we haven't done a great job of always representing that, but there is a beauty in the fact that because we are broken and we still call and point to the truth, to the one that is the author of your life as well, there's still something to be learned. So I would say engage in curious questions. And when you see things, or just bounce ideas off of Christians, it's your job to making us uncomfortable. And it's your job to ask the curious questions too. Don't be afraid of asking things or sharing your experience. That is something that we need and you need as well. Like, will it all be solved in this lifetime? No, but it will be so good to have real conversation instead of just surface level, like, oh, I'm a Christian, I go to church on Sundays. Like, oh, that's cool. Like, yeah.
So good. Yeah. Those who aren't Christian, don't want to be Christian, your questions, you actually are very helpful to get us out of our bubble. And that's exactly what this podcast is about. And you can follow Hadeel on Real with Hadeel, her own podcast, where she's keeping it real, having these kind of conversations. And wow, Hadeel, thank you so much for
Thank you. I really enjoyed today.
Here. Yeah, sharing your thoughts. And let us know what you think, listeners. We really want to start to build dialogue, exactly what we're talking about here. We're going to be using Facebook and Instagram as a place to get comments or feedback. Would love to hear from you. Could reach out to Hadeel. She'd love to hear from you. And for all you out there, you've been listening to Between Two Worlds, podcast about belief, unbelief, and everything in between. Thank you so much for listening.
Bye.